Well, welcome to all of you. My name is Trey Thompson. I'm the Executive Director of the Oklahoma Historical Society, and it's so great to have you all here with us for this wonderful event tonight to talk about Congressman Dick T. Morgan with the author of the book Justice for All, and also with Dick's great-grandsons, Kenyon and David. I just want to thank you for being a part of this event, and I want to remind you that these are the things that we love to do here at the Oklahoma Historical Society. We exist to collect, preserve, and share the unique history and culture of the state and the people of Oklahoma through all of the work we do. And so we appreciate your support not only for this event, but for other events that we do. We have some special guests tonight, and I want to point them out. One of our board members is here, Jim Waldo. Jim, where are you at in the room today? I saw you earlier. Oh, Jim went to get a book. Okay. And then my predecessor, Dr. Bob Blackburn, is in the room. There he is right there. I want to point out Nicole Harvey, who is the new director of the museum here, the Oklahoma History Center Museum. Nicole is right over here, so you all can say hello to her when you get a moment. And I want to remind you, if you can put your phones on silent or on vibrate before we start out, that'll help everybody else to keep their concentration. We're going to do a short program here where we will have Michael Hightower, who is the author of the book. And gentlemen, I'll let you kind of introduce yourselves a little bit as we get into this program a little bit. And then we have, on the far end there, we have Kenyon Morgan, and we have David Morgan here, Dick T. Morgan's great-grandsons. I will also say that Bob Blackburn and I host a podcast on Oklahoma history called A Very Okay Podcast. And if you haven't had a chance to listen to it, you should, because we are very compelling. We are the most exciting Oklahoma history podcast you will find. We might be the only Oklahoma history podcast you will find. But our most recent episode, we had David and Michael on, and we spent an hour talking about this book. So if you leave this event going, I just wish we could have talked a little longer, you can pull up that podcast episode and you can listen to it. So after we conclude the lecture here, we'll move out into the auditorium outside, and you'll have a chance to purchase the book, and then you can get it signed by all of the group that's here today. So without further ado, I want to turn, yes.
Okay.
What's that?
I thought you said you were going to start with Michael. Why you we're going to start here?
Yeah, I don't know. Where do you want to start? Who wants to start?
They told me I had to go first.
Okay, well, then we're going to start
I'd rather not go at all, but they told me to go first.
Okay. We're going to start with David here, and we'll let you guys kick it off, and if we have any dead air, then I'll just start throwing questions at you
Okay,
guys.
well,
So.
that's a good warning. And Trey, I think we have, I don't know how you all did this. It looks to me like you have exactly the same number of chairs as you do people who are in the room. So that's someone did a great job.
It's not our first rodeo.
But I'm David Morgan, and we're here today with your far left is my brother Kenyon, of course, and then in the middle is Michael Hightower, and we're here to talk about a book that Michael Hightower has just finished very recently, and it is called, it's a very long book, so I'm not take any chances with it. It is called Justice for All, Dick T. Morgan, Frontier Lawyer and Common Man's Congressman. And it's by Dr. Michael J. Hightower. But I would like to go back just a little ways. About 10 years ago, I retired from MidFirst Bank, as many of you all know, and I was kind of looking for things to do. The last thing I thought I would do would be to help somebody write a book, but I did think I would probably do some research on family history. And one of the candidates for my research was my great-grandfather, Kenyon, my great-grandfather, who had been a congressman from Oklahoma at statehood time. And I thought it'd be interesting to kind of research his life. I really didn't know what was available for the research. My first move was a wonderful one. I went down and visited the Carl Albert Research Center, Congressional Research Center. And we have two of those people today who are here. Michael Cressman, will you wave or something, Michael? And J.A. Price. And I can tell you guys, everybody, well, first of all, I've thanked you all many, many times, over and over. Without the things that they had preserved and kept over the years, there would be no book. In fact, there would have been a very short family research about his life, but not really very much. But what I found when I visited Carl Albert Research Center, I saw a pretty amazing person. And I saw a person who had really participated a lot in Oklahoma history. And yet, he was very much unknown by people who, studied history. And I kind of wondered why. His main contribution in my mind, Oklahoma history, and everybody may have their own, a different idea, was what he did around the time of the land openings, and then all the way through to statehood, and then into Congress. He came to Oklahoma, and you all know the story, in 1889, April 22nd, first land run, 50,000 people made that run. There were 10,000 people who came to Oklahoma City, where we are. Another 10,000 were in Guthrie. But listen to this fact. In Guthrie, among those 10,000 people, there were 214 lawyers. You heard it right, 214 lawyers. And he was one of those. He was 35 years old. But listen to this. Over the next 15 years, he would represent more homesteaders than any other attorney in Oklahoma Territory. And then at statehood, he would be elected to 6 terms in the U.S. Congress. He was what we called a progressive Republican. Do we have any of those around today? But it was during a very important time in American history through the progressive era while he was in Congress, and we'll get back to this when Michael gets on the stage in a few minutes. But it made me wonder why we had this person, relative of mine, who had done so much to help Oklahoma get from to statehood and on, and very little was known about him. My first visit after that was to Dr. Bob Blackburn. I said, Bob, what's the deal? Why does nobody know about my great-grandfather? Is it just me? Do I just like him because he's a relative? And where'd Bob go? Bob will confirm this. He said, no, he really should be known in Oklahoma history. Bob, even not knowing me very well, suggested that Kenyon and I write the book. Now that would have been hilarious. But luckily, Bob also gave me some names, and very luckily I picked out, I didn't pick out, the first person I talked to was Michael Hightower, and he just did a wonderful job on this. For fear of talking all night long on this myself, I want to ask Michael a question. Michael, what connected you to this story when you and I talked about it?
Well, good to be here, and thanks to everybody. Can you hear me okay? I think it's coming through. Good. So what connected me to it was realizing that I'd never heard of this guy either. I've done a lot of work in Oklahoma history. I've had an office here at the History Center. I've done some other projects. Never did I come across the name Dick T. Morgan. So that got me kind of fired up. I would get to be the first guy to really write about this guy. And then I found out, the wealth of information down at the Carl Albert Center, and of course knew Jay from the time he worked here at the History Center. So it was my version of a playground. I mean, I've got all these resources. If you like to do this kind of work, then this was a real gift. And then I also found all kinds of resources right here in the archives and in the vertical files upstairs. So getting to be the first to tackle this particular project and having such fantastic resources, it's a field of dreams.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I also, with having a Field of Dreams myself, I really felt like that my great-grandparents had left all this material for us to see like 100 years later. And I felt like it was such a dramatic presentation of what they had saved and eventually got to the University of Oklahoma and then eventually to the Carl Albert Center. It was like, you've got to take advantage of this. You've got to look at this. So I didn't have the excuse of having a 70-hour-a-week job any longer. I actually had time to do things like this. And what I immediately saw was this, like I said earlier, this amazing person who just had this passion driven to do things for people. And my first question to myself was, where did this come from? Where did this come from? And what I found very quickly was a 7-year-old Hoosier boy in Indiana, right at the outset of the Civil War, seeing his brothers and cousins, older cousins, go to battle and wanting to do something for the Union cause. His family they were Whig Republicans, they were pro-Lincoln and very anti-slavery, but he wanted to do something for the Civil War, but he's 7 years old, what could he do? Well, he noticed that every so often there would be these troops that would march through town. They were called the Home Guard troops. They were the ones that were left behind to guard the people at home while other people were fighting. And he got an idea that he would like to march along with those troops. And he actually went up and tugged on somebody's coat, probably a 17-year-old soldier, and said, "I'd like to march with you guys." And I'm sure the guy just, and of course I'm making all this up, of course. It had to happen some way. And I'm sure the guy said, "Well, you have to learn how to play the drums." Well, it is true. This part is absolutely true. He went home and learned how to play the drums, came back the next week, probably tugged on the same shirt, and said, "I'm here and ready." And this time the 17-year-old soldier said, "Go to the front of the line." And he actually went up front and marched in front of the troops. And the rest of his life, 60 years later when he does his memoirs, his first story is about the feeling he had when he marched in front of those troops, like I say, 60 years later. And that would begin his passion for wanting to do things for people. Kenyon, I better get Kenyon in here, I'll get in a lot of trouble. One of the things that he did...
They're already in a lot of trouble.
One thing that Dick would do, Kenyon, he would, when he was helping homesteaders make their claims, he wrote books and did other things. Why don't you tell the class here some of the things that he did?
Okay. Can everybody hear me? I think I'm okay, great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, Dick T. Morgan came with a plan. I think while everybody else was shining their guns or doing something about, coming to Oklahoma, guess what? Dick T. Morgan was writing a book about homesteading. So when he came to Oklahoma, he had a book that he could sell to other people, but it was a very important book because you had up to 50,000 people coming to settle the first land run of 1889, and they didn't really know how to file a claim. I mean, you can run, but there was a whole set of rules that you had to follow to actually make a claim on a land, and that was the Homestead Act of 1862. So he had a book that he started selling, and it was called Morgan's Manual to the Homestead Laws, and it eventually sold 20,000 copies in Territory, Oklahoma, and it was the go-to book, for people who wanted to know how to file a claim, and this was very important because half the claims in Oklahoma were disputed. So if you knew the rules, then you could hopefully get your claim to be the one that was accepted by the land office. Well, that was the 1889 run when he wrote the manual, and it came out, I think, in 3 or 4 different editions, David.
Yeah.
But here comes the 1893 run of the Cherokee Outlet. So he decides to do even something, an additional thing. And this is a map, and this is a blown up copy of the map, and it's the only known copy of the map that is actually, he says, published. Here it says published by Dick T. Morgan, and it was a map of the sectional claims that could be filed, not only for the original land run was these 5 counties right here, but there were a couple other land runs, and then in 1893 there was the largest land run where we had 2 million acres available. 4 million acres there. And I think there were up to 100,000 people trying to make that run for those lands. So Dick T. Morgan has added to his repertoire a map. And so we have the stories about him selling his book for $1.50. And the map was 50 cents. But if you bought the book, you could get the map for only a quarter. This was the kind of bargaining businessman he was. And guess what? Mike, can you hold this for a while?
Please get your mic back in.
Right, okay. I think, Mike, you might hold this part of that.
You didn't know you were working today, Michael.
All right, so I was doing some architectural work in Enid, Oklahoma, at a retirement center nursing home, and a guy was displaying all these terracotta photographs, and then his prize exhibit was up on this easel, and I go up there and look at it, and I see that my great-grandfather's name is on this map, and this is the only known copy of this map, and we've talked to the Oklahoma History Center, we've talked to the Carl Albert Archives, and I've looked on the internet for it too. So I tried to buy the map, and the guy would not sell it to me, but he did make a copy, and so for this book, a copy just like this is included in every book. And you don't even have to pay a quarter for it. It's free.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to.
Well, and then I have a very special.
Oh, I forgot your special map. Okay.
I have a special map here too. Michael,
We haven't rehearsed this, by the way, in case you can't tell.
if you wanted to look real authentic, you can have that for an extra $5. You go to Starbucks and you buy some coffee and you put it on your console in your car and you spill it on the map.
Jane, do you have a confession? Okay, thank you. Yeah, Jane's done that today already. Okay, Michael, we got to get to the author here, don't we? You told me one time that there was some of the things he did just got to your belly. Tell, that's really interesting to me. Tell the group what you mean.
Well, here's what he means by that. So I never start out with the title of a book that I end with. There's always kind of a convoluted trail to get to the right title. One of our early iterations was A Forgotten Founder. And we stuck with that for a while, and for a very good reason. As we said, he's been lost to history largely until now. But so here's what I learned pretty early on in the research. Here was a farm boy from Indiana with this unshakable faith in America's promise. He was a deeply religious guy. One of his claims to fame is he founded churches all over Oklahoma Territory. He was a lawyer who adjudicated land disputes between honest, law-abiding land claimants and Sooners, and we know what they were like. 6-term congressman who promoted legislation based on this bedrock principle of justice for everybody. hence the title, Justice for All. He was also an outspoken advocate for soldiers returning home from World War I. And passed a lot of legislation passed. He really prefigured a lot of the VA benefits we have today. And we forgot about this guy? That's not right. So that is what put the fire in my belly to say we've got to do something about this Republican from Western Oklahoma. And when I say Republican, we're talking the party of Lincoln, a very different day.
Michael, we had we got to get Oklahoma from a territory to a state. Of course, it happened, so now it looked like it had to happen that way. But Michael, it was really kind of a rocky road between getting Oklahoma Territory, which is sitting right next to Indian Territory, that got combined into one state. Tell that story.
Yeah, you know, we have this image, and I think it goes back to Rodgers and Hammerstein, really. So you're going to get the tune going in your head here pretty soon, but a brand new state. Everybody got that? Won't be able to get that out of your mind for a while? Okay. That's where we get this notion of this blissful union, but it just wasn't that way. Between 1900 or so and 1907, opposition in Oklahoma Territory to union with Indian Territory was really strong. And at the same time, opposition in Indian Territory was really strong against union with Oklahoma Territory. It was really a mismatch. This was not going to be a blissful union. Here's what Dick T. and most Republicans in western Oklahoma, and by this time his home base was Woodward, where we were last week, which is wonderful. But that's where he ran from when he made it to Congress. But what he really wanted was a pro-business state aligned with eastern and midwestern states, oriented towards and able to attract capital. He wanted to be Oklahoma Territory included in national networks of commerce and industry. And I told David he got a kick out of it, and then it wound up as the title of Chapter 7. What Dick T. really wanted was Indiana with a panhandle. So picture that if you can. It would be kind of an ugly image, but that's really what he was looking for was inclusion in national networks of business-oriented states. So there was a mock wedding ceremony. You probably already know that. On November 16 of 1907, between the Twin Territories. Everybody woke up on November 17 with a brand new state. But Dick T. had very good reason to doubt that it would be a blissful union. So to me, one of the real interesting things about this project was looking at all these perspectives. What did the Western Oklahoma Territory Republicans want? What did President Roosevelt want? How did New Mexico and Arizona get twisted up in the last 4 states in the continental U.S.? What did the Native Americans want? They didn't want that union because they knew that was the slippery slope to disintegration of tribal sovereignty. Lots of points of view and a much more complicated story than just two happy couple getting married. Much more interesting.
And one thing that you need to realize, again, it happened, now we're all together and happy, but there was just a lot, Oklahoma Territory and Indian Territory had not really evolved together during those 18 years after the land run. They were very differently, different whether they were governed. And again, you can't get over, and we know that from today, the number one thought the tribes had is they wanted the sovereignty. They wanted their sovereignty. And what people like Dick T. Morgan want, like I said, Indiana with a panhandle, they wanted a Republican state that was Midwestern values. But, okay, but statehood gets passed. There are 1,000 stories in here about little niches and so forth. So Dick T. goes to Congress. He goes March the 4th, 1909. It's the same day that William Howard Taft is being inaugurated as president. Back then, the president was inaugurated in March instead of January. He became a very progressive legislator, but it took some time. When he first started out in the legislature, he was accused of being a stand-patter. You can tell what a stand-patter means, for the status quo. By the time he was in his third term, he was introducing legislation for the Federal Trade Commission. He was sponsoring legislation for the Farm Act. He was legislation to prevent abuses in the labor industry. Michael, you have one of the things that he called himself the father of the Federal Trade Commission.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about his role in the Federal Trade Commission.
Yeah, I love this story. So today we've heard a lot about the FTC, mainly in relation to its campaign to protect all of us from predatory corporations, from unfair and discriminatory pricing, particularly against tech behemoths, and trying to do something to regulate this AI genie that's now out of the bottle. But that's all the FTC, right? So today we're talking about the father of the FTC. He called himself that, and he was called that by others. And I'm going to read a little passage here from page 241, I think it is, but you'll find it. But this comes from a speech that Dick T. gave on the floor of Congress in support of this brand new agency that he wanted to create. So Morgan was convinced that public sentiment favored antitrust legislation. Quote, "I believe the people in this country believe that the large business concerns do possess an undue amount of monopolistic power, and that they possess such monopolistic power that they can manipulate and arbitrarily control prices, and this legislation is in response to that public opinion," unquote. As the states lacked authority to protect citizens from corporate abuse, it fell to the federal government to beef up the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 by appointing an agency to enforce fairness in corporate policies, outlaw preferential treatment to individuals and businesses, and prevent unreasonable and unjust discrimination in pricing. Now, who here does not think that speech could be given today? And as I say, the FTC lives on, as hopefully will, as a very powerful and important agency of the federal government.
And Michael, also the other thing that it answered a question for me, back to my original question I had with Bob Blackburn about why doesn't anybody know about this person? He did so many things. Politics. In 1913, as Dick T. was starting his third term, everything in Washington changed. President Wilson came in as president. Both houses of Congress were Democratic. And here is Dick T. Morgan sitting there as a Republican. He had introduced the Federal Trade Commission in 1912, but in 1913, he was no longer in power. And guess what party was in power? The Democrats. And guess who wanted to take what Dick T. Morgan had started in 1912 and carry to the finish line? And they did. And he was kind of left out of it. And he knew he was. He wasn't happy about it. He complained about it. He took every opportunity he could, and we was talking to Congress 6 years later and say, "Oh, don't forget, I'm the one who introduced the FTC," because he knew he had been kind of shortcutted on history. But just one more answer to that. The other issue, the other legislation I want Michael to talk about is the Farm Loan Act, because we're still using it today. And Dick had personal experience as a farm boy. His family lost half their farm when their father died because of taxes. So he knew what a disadvantage, farmers were at. Michael?
By all means, yeah, I love this one too. So, as David said, he did have experience on the farm, so he was the right guy to promote this legislation. But what I really want to get at is how he came to his legislation. He was a bloodhound when it came to research and a bloodhound when it came to ferreting out fact from fiction. we live in a world today where that may not be the case so much anymore. I mean, it seems like if we don't like reality, we'll just make up a new reality. We'll blast it out on social media. Maybe we'll get a little boost from our AI gizmo on the screen that I hadn't touched yet. I'm scared to death of that thing. And then another reality, right? Who cares about the facts? Well, Dick T cared about the facts. So here's my Dick T story and facts. A really good example. He was incensed that farmers and ranchers didn't have access to credit like manufacturing business. In fact, he voted against the Federal Reserve Act because it did one reason, there's several, but one of them was that it didn't have any provisions for credit to farmers. Okay, so did he just bellyache about it? Did he give speeches about it? No. Well, he did that. But he took advantage of a long congressional recess to write a 300-page book under the bestseller title, Land Credits, A Plea for the American Farmer. Okay, so I read it, and I actually read it on Google Books, which is fine. It's a little dry. But so what did he find in his survey of land credit systems around the world? He found in 18th century Prussia that Frederick the Great had established the German Landschaften. Apologies to German speakers for my accent. But he thought that might be a good model for American, for credit system for the U.S. So he writes his 300-page book. He makes sure when everybody gets back from their 13-month vacation to Congress that they had a copy of it. And, you can either read it or you can read my summary in Chapter 11. That's a lot more palatable. But it was a hugely important piece of legislation. The act was passed on July 17th of 1916. And if you look on page 272, you will see a photo of the signing ceremony, thanks to these pack rats here. And you'll see a picture of Dick T right next to the flower vase. So here's my little postscript to that. So in March of 2011, Bob had set me loose on researching bank history around Oklahoma. He didn't know it, but he has put me on the road to dozens and dozens of interviews with bankers around the state, from Boise City to Altus to, I don't know where, Idabel, you name it, I was there. One place I went was the Ag Credit Bank in Ponca City, right down from the Pioneer Women's Museum. Talked to a couple of great guys in there. And their bank is all about farm lending. And there's nothing they were prouder of than the fact that their bank had its roots in the, guess what, the Farm Credit Act of 1916. So I got an earful about this in 2011. Little did I know that the father of this act would be a biography subject 14 years later. So that's just kind of a fun personal story, but I thought you might enjoy it. So now we know the rest of the story.
Michael, one thing I think we ought to make sure that we, as we were writing this book, we were having fun. We were having fun. One of the things we did, and probably the most fun to me, was we called them walkabouts. We would go out, and Kenyon and I, even before we brought Michael onto the team, Kenyon had gone to Washington, D.C., and walked around the Capitol and found places where Dick and his wife Orietta, what a name, Orietta, had lived, and the architecture and the structures and so forth. Kenyon had been to Indiana in Prairie Creek, where Dick T was a boy, and Terre Haute, where he was a man before he moved to Kansas. Ellen and I followed Kenyon's footsteps to Indiana, and it's just so enjoyable to stand right, to find right where your great-grandfather had been, and know you were standing right where he was. Ellen and I, we even went to Garden City, Kansas. Garden City was one of his stopovers. And again, we're able to follow where he had his law offices in Garden City and his home. And then Ellen and I spent a few days in South Dakota. One summer, Dick had gone to South Dakota for a land opening. I think it was the Rosebud Indian Tribe land opening. And we found his places where he had been an attorney. I even wrote an article for the Yankton paper about that land opening and the role that Dick T. Morgan played in it. And of course, once we got to Oklahoma, and Michael was on our team, the three of us would go. We went to Guthrie, we went to Perry, where he had an office. In fact, his office in Perry, do you remember when they brought Timmy McVeigh out of the Perry courthouse, when they finally realized he had more than just a no license plate, and they brought him out on what would be the west side of the courthouse? If he had kept walking across the street, he would have walked right into the office of Dick T. Morgan. His office in Perry was right on the courthouse. We also went to El Reno. This is when it was really handy to have Kenyon along, who's an architect, could actually discuss buildings and churches and things with us. And Kenyon, you even suggested to the First Christian Church they should get on the National Historic Board. Have they done that yet?
I don't know. I suggested Bob Blackburn do the review for me.
Oh, good. Good idea. But those walkabouts were so much fun. You just don't realize when you're actually in the same place, they gave us enough information that we were able to really go in their footprint. I should mention when we were in Terre Haute, where they lived for about 3 or 4 years, every place he worked there in Terre Haute has some connection to Larry Bird, who went to Indiana State University. There's a Larry Bird Street. There's a Larry Bird Avenue. There's a Larry Bird Circle. Everything's Larry Bird there. So I got my taste of Larry Bird while I was in Terre Haute. But that was the kind of fun we had. And I have one more thing I want to say about a talk he gave. Michael, are you?
I was going to add on to something you said.
Please do. No, go ahead. You go ahead.
Well, I wanted to add on.
Mine's a big finale.
Oh, well, then this is not a big finale. This
Okay.
is fun. This is a anecdote, I guess. But when we went to Perry, here was the juxtaposition for me, and I write about it because it really kind of got to me. 100 years to the year 1895, before the guy he mentioned was arrested, Dick T. was in the middle of a really important formation of an organization. It was called the Territorial Free Home League. And what it was, according to the Homestead Act of 1862, you get your land for free, you prove it up, you build a fence, buy some cows, and it's yours, right? Those were the rules, and that's what President Lincoln signed in 1862. Well, somebody got the bright idea to add some taxes to homesteads, and that didn't go over real well. I mean, a couple $100 here and there meant the difference between success and going bust. So there was this Territorial Free Home League established really right across the street. I think in Dick T.'s office. It gets a little shady, but we know he was there, and he probably led the meeting. But it's right across the street from where they led McVeigh out 100 years later. And I really do make the observation, something's gone wrong. We've got this colossal act of building, of working on behalf of farmers and ranchers and trying to give them a fair shake and give them that. And 100 years later, we're leading this clown out of the Perry courthouse. That just got to me. It was just a moment. So I had that to think about as we drove back to Oak City that night, is how did, this is just real juxtaposition. So you can have the finale.
Okay. To show what a nerd I am, in case you've forgotten that, I actually wrote a story, a newspaper article for the Alva newspaper, the Alva Courier, about the Free Home Act. And I do not recommend anybody needs to read that. I'm just making that comment. But if you want to, it's basically about it actually was kind of a fun article. It was about the celebration when the land became free, when everybody thought they still owed $200 or $400 on it. I'm going to go back just to the very end of this. In 1917, Dick was asked to give a commencement address to his alma mater, Union Christian College in Merriam, Indiana. And this is Michael Word. He ought to be the one saying this, but I have the microphone, so I'm going to go ahead and finish. It said he had watched William Howard Taft. This is talking about Dick T. Morgan. He had watched William Howard Taft place his hand on the Bible and swear to protect and defend the nation. At the same time, Morgan was participating in the House of Representatives swearing-in ceremony. What was the takeaway? The voter and the citizen, listen to this, the voter and citizen are under the same obligation to perform their duties as the president is to perform his duties. Fundamentally, it's not the public officer, but the citizen who holds the destiny of the nation in his hand. You guys, this is today. This is today. This speech was given in June of 1917. What was the future of these graduates in June of 1917? Wilson had come to Congress on, I believe it was April the 4th. That's a special day in our family. To ask for a declaration of war. These were the people who were going to Europe to fight the battle. These are the people he's talking to. He says, our people will make any sacrifice that is necessary to conduct the war to a successful conclusion. Quoting Lincoln's fervent prayer at Gettysburg, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, Morgan implored his young listeners to get behind another birth of freedom so that forever thereafter peace shall reign among them. The next sentence is the last sentence Michael writes in his book. That was good advice for the class of 1917 and for us too. And we just owe so much thanks to Michael for putting this together. It's pretty amazing to watch somebody write a book. But thank you guys very much. If anybody has any questions or comments, or it looks like we have one questioner coming up, but
Anybody have any questions?
What years did he serve in Congress?
he served from 1909, which again is started on March the 4th, and he died in office on July 4th, 1920. So he was getting ready to campaign for his seventh term. And again, there's a real interesting story about his death and what they did afterwards and so forth. But we'll save something for you to read.
And of course, I mean, everybody in this room knows two other statesmen who died on July 4th. It's Jefferson and Adams.
Yeah.
So just something to think about, you know.
So you had a question? You had a hand up?
You answered my question with that answer.
Okay. Yes, sir. Back to John. Or no, it's not John. So it's Uncle. I'm sorry. He's the one on the far right. No, he's the one in the doorway on the far right. Yeah. You know, and this is interesting because he's only 42 years old in this picture. And the guy keeps losing elections. And I think finally his wife gave him a come to Jesus talk. Said, Dick, do you want to win an election? You got to shave that awful beard. And if you look on the back of the book, if anybody's got on the back of the book yet, here he is 10 years later. He's kind of a handsome, are we up over there? Yeah. Yeah, there he is. And he's actually kind of a handsome guy, but while he had that beard, he wasn't winning anything. He was just
Kenyon is the only one carrying forth the beard here
that's right.
in the family.
I think it looks good on Kenyon, though.
But there was a day when I looked like that.
Any other questions?
Is that Judge Stoner back there? Another descendant of a great-grandchild of Dick T. Morgan.
All right, fantastic.
Thanks for coming.
Question in the back.
I have not seen it in large print, but I assume it's not.
No.
It's available on Kindle and you can make
Yeah. Well, that's true. That's true.
It is an
It's
ebook, so you can blow it up that way. But yeah, then
Yeah.
you don't get the feel of these nice pages, you know, kind of a.
We're hoping it'll be in audio before too long. I don't know exactly the process you do that. I'll probably have to go talk to Bob about that and figure out how to make that go into audio. But yes,
What state was your grandmother from?
she was also with great grandmother. She was also from Indiana. She was from Covington, Covington, Indiana. They met at Union Christian College. Her father had been on the president of the board of trustees of the university. So that took some nerve to date a girl whose father was on the board of trustees of the university. But they obviously fell in love. They were a perfect couple for each other. And again, there's a lot of, I can't think of a lot of stories, but I can't tell them all right now. I'm sorry.
And
It's too much fun.
Speaking of her, she was like a math major.
Yeah.
I mean, think of this in the 1870s. I mean, that's progressive. And then,
Yeah.
no surprise, Dick T was a big advocate for women's rights, way early on. So even when he was a legislator in Indiana, we have a speech in here that got a lot of praise from women's rights activists who said, yeah, it's about time somebody spoke up,
Yeah.
So he
Mike,
was-
let me add something to she died 24 years after he died, and that was just a couple of years before David and I were born. But everybody referred to her as a pack rat. Well, now she would be called an archivist because she was the one that preserved all this stuff
Yeah.
and kept all these speeches and letters and talks that our grandfather then carried down to the University of Oklahoma that are now in the Carl Albert archives. So be careful
Yeah.
what you call people.
It took a team to have this stuff ready for us when Kenyon and I went down there to see what we had. I mean, what a treasure trove of information you guys had. It's just amazing. I mean, you'd go so slow through those files because every letter was interesting. And one of the things that I found I was getting really passionate about this guy. And I think it was because he was so passionate. And as I look out here, I hope our passion, rubs off on you guys. Will you guys think about, one more chance before I go somewhere else, do I need to provide some history of the family? Because we were lucky. We had the pack rat of all pack rats, and she had so much information that we just, couldn't get enough. But somebody has to take that step to do that.
And rubbed off on me, I can tell you that.
Yeah.
Well, okay, 2 more questions, then I want to wrap up so that we make sure we have time to get people signatures and all of those kinds of things. So, right, Jay, did you have a question?
Well, I just have to do a plug for our and this collection actually, like you say, is very interesting, but what makes this interesting is a lot of our collections have been gone, that people have gone through them, they've taken these things out. This one is pretty cohesive, and there was letters, right, written back and forth between Dick and Maura, and Porter, and his entire family. Like every day there was a letter, so you really are experiencing like history in real time, or his experience as a congressperson in real time, because he's writing back and forth constantly about where he is, what's going on, what has happened on the floor today, what is happening at the church tonight, with his family. He's really involved in that. So it makes it even more special, especially when you have college kids that are getting interested in the story, because that doesn't happen too often, but they're actually very interested in what's going to happen next.
And Jay, one thing I remember you told me one time, I hope I'm quoting you correctly, J.A. has read hundreds of letters of Dick T. Morgan. I think you told me you never saw where he said a bad thing about anybody. And so many people, when you read biographies, you almost cringe before you turn the next page, not knowing what might be there in today's world. And that stuck with me all the way through that it was one of the first things he told me. And there's one more question back there. Trey, this is our... Well, yeah, there's a whole lot in here about race relations because there's a whole lot going on at that time in Oklahoma about Jim Crow-ism and other items on that. We obviously don't have time to do that. I would say he was always on the right side of for that time. One story stands out to me. In 1919, he was on the cover of the Black Dispatch in Oklahoma City. The reason he was on the cover was Michael had mentioned the Home for Soldiers bill. He got a letter from a black editor in Chicago who asked if Dick would consider some ideas from his group. Sounds pretty innocuous, but this is 1919 Oklahoma. And just the fact that Dick wrote him back and said, "Dear friend, we would be happy to consider anything you provide to me for help." That was such a different way that people acted at that time toward minorities. They put his face on the cover of the Black Dispatch and quoted his letter, his dear friend letter. But that's the way he thought about people. He was for people.
Okay, well, let's give him a round of applause, everybody. And I do want to say I've read the book. It is phenomenal. There is so much more in it we didn't have a chance to cover today. So I want you all to go buy it. And I do want to remind you, it's only 10 months till Christmas. So buy some copies for your friends and keep them for Christmas gifts. But this is a great book. And Michael and David and Kenyon have done such a good job of bringing their great-grandfather to life through this. And I want you all to go get it, and I want you to get it signed out there. And don't forget, we have some refreshments over here as well you're welcome to take advantage of. And we are going to move, Sarah's waving, we're going to move out into the rotunda and let you purchase a book and get it signed. So thank you all for coming tonight.